The house was packed, the lights blinding, and the roar of the crowd shook the very walls. Elvis Presley stood center stage, dressed in one of his iconic jumpsuits, microphone in hand, pouring every ounce of himself into the song. For years, fans had screamed, cried, and fainted in his presence, but on this night, something different happened. Near the edge of the stage, a young woman collapsed into tears. Her hands trembled as she reached out, sobbing uncontrollably. She wasn't screaming like the others, she was breaking down, overwhelmed by the weight of seeing the king of rock and roll just a few feet away. Security leaned in, ready to pull her back, but Elvis did something no one expected. He stopped. In front of thousands of screaming voices, he paused mid-performance and walked over. The music softened and the arena seemed to hold its breath. Elvis bent down, not as the star, not as the untouchable legend, but as a man seeing another human being in pain. He gently took her hand, whispered something no one else could hear, and gave her the kind of comfort most fans only dreamed of. Tears streamed down her face as he wiped them away, his calm presence soothing her in a way no song ever could. The crowd erupted into applause, but it wasn't the wild frenzy of excitement, it was an applause born from awe. Elvis wasn't just entertaining anymore, he was revealing his heart. And then, just as that tender moment unfolded, another presence entered the scene. From the side of the stage, Priscilla Presley walked in. The crowd noticed instantly. The cameras didn't need to catch it, the energy shifted. Whispers rippled through the audience. Everyone knew the complicated history between Elvis and Priscilla. They had been the golden couple once adored and envied, but by this point their love had fractured. Rumors of distance, heartbreak, and separation had filled the tabloids. Fans wondered if they were still connected at all, or if the bond had finally shattered for good. So when Priscilla stepped into the arena, eyes fixed on Elvis kneeling with that fan, every heart in the building tightened. What would she do? Her face was unreadable. She didn't storm out. She didn't scowl or look away. She stood still, watching Elvis as he poured his soul into comforting a stranger. And in that moment, every fan knew they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Because this wasn't just about a fan anymore. It was about Priscilla. It was about the years of love and loss, about the weight of being tied forever to a man who belonged to the world, but who in rare moments revealed his truest self. The woman in Elvis's arms clung to him, shaking with gratitude. Elvis smiled softly at her, whispered one last thing, and then kissed her hand before standing tall again. The audience erupted, the band tried to catch up, but all eyes weren't on the music anymore, they were on Elvis and Priscilla. And then it happened. Priscilla's expression shifted. For a brief second, her composure cracked, revealing something raw. Was it pain, was it regret, or was it something entirely different? Fans in the front swore they saw her lips tremble. Others said they saw her smile, faint but real. No one could agree, but everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment drenched in emotion, one that blurred the line between public performance and private heartbreak. The whispers grew louder. Was this jealousy? Was she reliving her own past with Elvis, remembering the nights when she was the one he comforted, the one he whispered to, the one he reached for? Or was it something no one expected at all? The tension in the room was electric. Even as Elvis continued the show, singing as though nothing had happened, the true drama was unfolding silently between him and Priscilla. The fan he had comforted disappeared back into the crowd, but the energy of that brief encounter lingered in the air like smoke after a firework. Elvis had shown his heart, Priscilla had seen it, and now everyone waited for her response. What came next wasn't scripted, rehearsed, or planned. It wasn't part of the performance or the carefully crafted image. It was real, raw, and unforgettable. Because when Priscilla finally reacted, it wasn't what anyone in that arena, or watching from afar, expected. Her reaction didn't just stun Elvis. It stunned the entire crowd. It stunned the fans who followed their every move, and it would ripple far beyond that night, remembered as one of the most shocking moments in the history of their complicated, unforgettable story. And that was only the beginnings. To understand why Priscilla's reaction that night carried so much weight, you have to look beyond the stage lights and the screaming fans. You have to go back into the tangled history of Elvis and Priscilla Presley, a story that was never simple, never ordinary, and never free from pain. They met when she was just a teenager, swept into Elvis's orbit like countless others, but unlike anyone else, she didn't remain a fan in the crowd. She became the woman who shared his home, his secrets, and his struggles. To the outside world, they were perfect, the king of rock and roll and his beautiful young bride, the picture of American royalty. But behind closed doors, their love was marked by turbulence, sacrifice, and wounds that never quite healed. By the time of that concert, their marriage had already unraveled. The divorce had been finalized, the lawyers had stamped the papers, and the fairy tale had cracked wide open. Yet their lives were still intertwined in ways neither of them could escape. They shared a daughter, Lisa Marie, and with her came a connection that no judge, no distance, and no fame could ever sever. But there was something else, something harder to explain. Priscilla had been with Elvis when he was untouchable, when the world was at his feet. She knew the man beneath the rhinestones, the one who battled loneliness, the one who wrestled with pressures no fan screaming in the stands could ever imagine. That bond left scars, but it also left a pull, an invisible string that tugged even when they stood on opposite sides of the room. So when Priscilla walked in that night and saw Elvis comforting a stranger, it hit her differently than it did the fans. To the audience, it was a beautiful, tender moment, but to her, it was personal. She had once been that girl. She knew what it felt like to be held by Elvis in a moment of vulnerability, to lean on his strength when the world felt too heavy. The fans' trembling hands, her tear-streaked face, it mirrored memories Priscilla had buried deep. Memories of nights when she had cried in his arms, when he had whispered promises, when she had believed in the fairy tale. And seeing him offer that same tenderness to someone else pulled those memories out like ghosts returning to haunt her. But the truth was more complicated than simple jealousy. Priscilla wasn't just watching another woman take what had once been hers. She was watching a man she had loved, still loved in some quiet, painful way, reveal the part of himself she had missed most. The Elvis on stage, the legend, the performer, belonged to the world. But the Elvis kneeling down to comfort that fan, that was the man she remembered. That was the husband, the father, the human being who could melt away every wall with just a touch. It must have been like standing in two timelines at once. In one, she was still the young woman who had walked beside him through fame, chaos, and heartbreak. In the other, she was the ex-wife, watching from a distance as he gave his tenderness to someone else. And yet her face revealed something no one in the crowd expected. Not anger, not rage, but an ache that went deeper. The audience could sense it, even if they couldn't name it. That's why the whispers started. That's why eyes darted between Elvis and Priscilla, searching for clues in the silent language of glances and half-hidden expressions. They weren't just witnessing a celebrity moment, they were watching an old wound reopen in real time. The press had painted their story in black and white. Elvis the superstar, Priscilla the abandoned wife. But the truth lived in the gray. They had hurt each other, loved each other, and remained tied in ways outsiders could never fully understand. And now, in the middle of a crowded arena, their private history bled into public view. Priscilla's reaction wasn't simple because her feelings weren't simple. Maybe there was regret for the love they had lost, for the choices that had pulled them apart. Maybe there was longing for the man who still had the power to bring the world to tears. Or maybe it was something harder to grasp, something that could only come from living in the shadow of a legend while knowing the man beneath it all. What mattered most was this. The moment stirred something in her that no one else could see but everyone could feel. Elvis had reached out to comfort a fan, but in doing so he had unknowingly reopened a chapter with Priscilla. Her silence, her stare, her unreadable expression, it carried the weight of years of love that refused to vanish, of pain that refused to heal. And that's why the crowd couldn't stop watching her. They weren't just curious about a fan. They were desperate to know, what would Priscilla do? Would she turn away, too wounded to watch? Would she confront him, demanding answers he couldn't give? Or would she surprise them all with something entirely unexpected? The truth, as the world would soon see, was that Priscilla's response would be far more shocking than anyone imagined. Because in that single moment, she wasn't just Elvis's ex-wife. She wasn't just a witness to his fame. She became part of the story again, whether she wanted to or not. And what she did next would leave the entire arena stunned. The crowd waited, every eye darting between Elvis on stage and Priscilla standing at the edge. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Fans expected fireworks, anger, confrontation, something sharp enough to pierce through the tenderness Elvis had just shown that crying fan. But what came next left the arena stunned. Priscilla didn't storm out, she didn't glare. Instead, she began to walk forward, her steps calm, measured, deliberate. The whispers grew louder, and you could almost feel the weight of speculation hanging over every seat. Was this about to turn into a public clash between the king of rock and roll and the woman who once shared his throne? When she reached Elvis, the tension broke, but not in the way anyone thought. She didn't accuse him, she didn't tear him down. She reached for the young fan who was still trembling from the overwhelming moment. To everyone's astonishment, Priscilla wrapped her arms around the girl and held her close, as if to reassure her that she wasn't alone. The crowd gasped. This was no act of jealousy, it was compassion. Elvis looked at Priscilla, his eyes widening, and for the first time in a long time, the two shared a moment that felt more intimate than any performance. It was quiet, wordless, but powerful. Together, they comforted the fan, Elvis with his steady presence, Priscilla with her unexpected kindness. The audience couldn't believe what they were seeing. The woman once described by the press as scorned, bitter, or distant was showing grace. She was choosing compassion over conflict, dignity over drama. And in doing so, she stunned not only Elvis but the entire world watching. People began to cheer, not the wild, frenzied cheer of a rock concert, but the kind of applause that comes when humanity breaks through spectacle. In that moment, Elvis and Priscilla weren't divorced, weren't estranged, weren't trapped in the endless cycle of gossip and headlines. They were two people showing something the world rarely got to see, unity even in brokenness. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a sweet gesture. It was layered, complicated, and filled with meaning. For Elvis, the moment hit hard. He had always been larger than life, but here he was reminded that no matter how many people screamed his name, Priscilla's presence could still stop him cold. She had a power no fan, no critic, no manager could ever take away. And for Priscilla, stepping in wasn't just about helping a fan. It was about showing the world that she refused to be defined by bitterness. She chose strength instead. And in that choice, she reminded Elvis and everyone else that she still carried a piece of his world no one else could touch. Rumors spread instantly. Was this the beginning of reconciliation? Was it a message to Elvis that she still loved him? Or was it simply an act of grace from a woman who had endured more than anyone knew? No one had the answer, but everyone who was there swore they had seen something extraordinary, something that felt bigger than music, bigger than fame. The fan, overwhelmed and sobbing, was eventually escorted away gently, but her moment with Elvis and Priscilla would be remembered forever. She had been the bridge between two people whose story was as tragic as it was legendary. And the way Priscilla reacted turned what could have been an awkward, painful scene into one of the most unforgettable moments in their history. Elvis tried to continue the show, but the energy had changed. His voice carried a new edge of emotion, his eyes lingered on Priscilla longer than before, and the song seemed heavier, weighted with meaning. The fans could feel it. They weren't just hearing music, they were watching a story play out in real time, a story of love, loss, and an unbreakable bond. And behind every lyric, behind every glance, there was the question no one could stop asking. What did Priscilla's reaction mean? Some said it was forgiveness. Others said it was a farewell, but one thing was clear, whatever it meant, it wasn't staged, it wasn't rehearsed, and it wasn't for show. It was real, and that's why it shook everyone to their core. By the end of the night, fans left the arena buzzing not about the set list, not about the jumpsuit Elvis wore, not even about the songs he sang. They left talking about Priscilla, about the moment she chose to stand beside a fan and in doing so stand beside Elvis once more. For years, people would debate what really happened on that stage, what it revealed about their relationship, and whether it marked a turning point. But in the heat of that moment, none of those questions mattered. What mattered was the truth that everyone in the room felt deep down. Sometimes the most shocking reaction isn't anger or revenge. Sometimes it's compassion. And that night, Priscilla Presley proved just how powerful compassion could be. The concert eventually ended, but the echoes of that night refused to fade. Fans left the arena with their voices hoarse and their hearts shaken. They had come expecting a performance, but they walked away with a story, one that would be whispered, debated, and retold for decades. The newspapers tried to capture it, but words on a page never fully explained the electricity in the air. Headlines screamed of reconciliation, of secret signals, of love reignited under the lights. Columnists speculated endlessly, was Priscilla sending a message? Was Elvis trying to win her back? Or had fate simply placed them in the same place at the same time to remind the world that their story wasn't finished? Behind the noise of speculation, something more powerful was happening. That night became a turning point in how fans remembered Elvis and Priscilla. For years, their story had been framed around heartbreak, betrayal, and divorce. But now people began to see it differently. They weren't just ex-lovers trapped in old wounds. They were two people bound by something deeper, something that even broken vows and shattered promises couldn't erase: compassion. The fan who had collapsed into tears never forgot it. In later interviews, she spoke about the way Elvis looked at her, how his presence felt like sunlight after a storm, but what truly stunned her was Priscilla. She didn't have to step in, the woman recalled, but she did. She showed me kindness when she had every reason not to. That moment changed me. And that was the heart of the legacy, Priscilla's choice. In an industry addicted to scandal, in a world hungry for gossip, she didn't give the tabloids what they wanted. Instead, she gave the world what it didn't expect: grace. Fans clung to that image of Elvis and Priscilla side by side, comforting a stranger. It became more than just a fleeting concert moment. It became a symbol. For some, it represented forgiveness. For others, it was proof that love never truly dies, it only changes shape. And for many, it was a reminder that even legends carry the same complicated emotions as the rest of us. The ripples went far beyond the music industry. Couples going through heartbreak pointed to that night as proof that compassion is stronger than bitterness. Fans who had idolized Elvis for his voice began to respect him for his humanity. And Priscilla, often painted by the media as a figure overshadowed by his fame, showed the world that her strength came not from standing behind Elvis, but from standing tall beside him, even when the world was watching. Over time, the story of that night turned into something larger than fact. It became folklore, a modern myth woven into the fabric of Elvis's legacy. People who weren't even there spoke about it as if they had witnessed it firsthand, passing the tale down like a piece of family history. And isn't that the true mark of a legendary moment? Not the clothes worn, not the song sung, but the way it leaves people different than before. That night left fans believing in something bigger than music. It left them believing in forgiveness, in unity, in the possibility that even broken hearts can find strength and compassion. For Elvis, the night was a reminder that no matter how many stages he commanded, no matter how many voices screamed his name, the presence of Priscilla still mattered in ways words could never explain. And for Priscilla, it was proof that even in the shadow of heartbreak, she could still choose grace. Years later, when people look back at the life of Elvis Presley, they remember the hits, the records, the sold-out tour. But those who were there that night will tell you something else. They'll tell you that the most unforgettable moment wasn't a song, it was a silence broken by compassion. Because long after the lights dimmed, long after the curtain fell, long after the applause faded into memory, one truth remained. Elvis and Priscilla's story wasn't just about love gained or lost. It was about the choices they made when the world was watching. And on that night, they chose kindness. That's why the story still lingers. That's why it still stuns anyone who hears it. Because sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't built on fame or fortune. It's built on moments of humanity that no stage could ever script. Stories like this prove that true legends aren't remembered only for their music or fame, but for the humanity they show in life's rawest moments. If this moment between Elvis, Priscilla, and a fan moved you, subscribe and share. Because some stories deserve to be kept alive forever.